Welcome to this episode of the Crypto Fatcat and the Crypto Skeptic. I am the Crypto Skeptic, Sean Fitzgerald, and this is my partner in crime, Jonathan Levy, who is the Crypto Fatcat. Jonathan, today I wanted to start with a question. Is the Bitcoin or crypto enthusiast on your Twitter feed scamming you? There's a concept in finance called talking your book, where you find the biggest sort of media platform that you can, and you talk up a stock that you've invested in because you're hoping to get more people to buy into it, so the price goes up. So if you're a fund manager and you get onto, CNBC or Fox or whatever, and you're talking up, NVIDIA or WeWork or whatever you've got your fund heavily invested in, you're hoping that enough people are going to see that where they're going to say, oh, this sounds like a good investment and get into it, right?
Yeah.
So I have a quote that I wanted to share with you. And this is a quote by the one and only Michael Saylor, who is CEO of MicroStrategy. He's got a pretty big Twitter feed. In it, he once advised people, actually in an interview as well, take all your money and buy Bitcoin. Then take all your time, figure out how to borrow more money to buy more Bitcoin. Then take all your time to figure out what you can sell to buy Bitcoin. And he similarly advised a conference room full of crypto enthusiasts in Miami to never sell their Bitcoin. Now, there's an interesting backstory to this. Michael Saylor has been the CEO of MicroStrategy for decades now. It's a software company that was pretty stagnant for some time. And he decided, and this is another quote from him, we're either going to die a fast death or a slow death or embark on a risky strategy. So what he opted to do was buy Bitcoin and buy a lot of it. So he started in August of 2020 when the company announced a plan to take half of its corporate reserves, which at the time was $250 million, and convert it into Bitcoin. And subsequently, MicroStrategy doubled down and doubled down again. So in total, what they did after their initial investment was they raised $2.4 billion in debt and loans. And they issued $1 billion in equity and extra stock equity that they could then invest. And they used it all to buy Bitcoin. And for a time, the decision appeared to be working. And the price of Bitcoin rose from about 11,900 in August 2020, which, by the way, was when you told me to invest. And I didn't do that. I wanted to think about it. Actually, it had gone up to, right? It went up so quickly from when you suggested it around 11,000 up to 15 that I thought, you know what? If I'm going to invest, first of all, I want to understand a little more. And secondly, I'd like to wait till it comes back down to 11, which obviously it has not done since. So he bought in around 11,900, and that was in August. By November 2021, it had gone up to, as you know, $69,000. And his stock, or the MicroStrategy stock, rose from $124 all the way up to $1,273. It was a 10x on his stock. So he personally, in that year, his net worth went up dramatically. Anybody who was a big investor in MicroStrategy made a bomb over that period of time. However, MicroStrategy has now announced its 7th quarterly loss in the last 8 quarters since it started buying Bitcoin. And this time the loss was big, $1 billion. And the same day as that $1 billion loss was announced, it was announced that Mr. Saylor was going to be losing his job as CEO and stepping down from that, or stepping to the side. It was a lateral move, or, move into the chairman position, whereas the company's president actually was going to be taking over the role of CEO. MicroStrategies, which did go up 10x, are down 49% year to date, and they're down 78% from its record. So
does that mean it's still like a 2.5x from the original stock price, though? Because 78% from 1,000 would be like 250 or something like that. And you're saying its stock was around 120, so it's still like a 2x on the stock, though, right?
It's not always like that when you have the ups and downs. Let me look at
that's fair.
I'm going to look at the chart.
Anyway, it's fine. I'm just trying to. You're painting a pretty bleak picture here.
So when he first started investing in Bitcoin, he was anywhere, the stock was bouncing around between 160 and 180. Okay. And it has gone down recently as low as 167, so it's to the same. And currently today it is at 319. So it's 319, 160 to 180.
So
you're
it's
right.
Like almost a 2x.
Almost a 2x. Yeah, we could say almost a 2x.
But a very
However,
volatile,
yes, very volatile, almost
trip.
2x. But here's the problem. The problem is when their debt comes due, are they able to pay back the debt if a bunch of the debt comes due at once and Bitcoin price is not high at that time? So if Bitcoin has another mini dip, if the stock market, has a dip and Bitcoin follows along with it, which it's been doing for the last couple of years, and let's say it does go back down to that $17,000 price that it was at a month or two ago, and then he's got all this debt that comes due, does MicroStrategy cease to exist as a company? Basically, do they blow off the doors and go out of business? So there's a couple things about this that are interesting. One is the debt and the leverage and the problem that creates. Imagine if he had just invested the 250 million and it had soared and the value of the company went way up as it, increased. That 250 million would have gone up from whatever it was worth at, $11,000 Bitcoins up to almost 70,000 Bitcoins. And then it's dropping all the way back to 21. He's still far ahead of the game, right? It still was a really good investment. However, he swung for the fences. He swung big, and he borrowed a lot of money, and he also released another $1 billion in equity in order to just buy more and more Bitcoin. It might work out for him if he's able to hold it for the next 5 years or 10 years. I don't know the answer to that one, but he's really put the company in danger. But who cares about MicroStrategy, right? There's lots of software companies out there. You might say. However, what about all the people who are reading about Michael Saylor saying, if you have money, put it into Bitcoin. If you have time, put it into thinking about what you can sell to put into Bitcoin. And on the face of that, it's, he's a true passionate believer. But behind the scenes, the more people who do that, the more money on a huge spectacular level that he was making. So I think there's a lot of smaller fries, a lot of the smaller fish in the sea who perhaps are, following that advice and getting burned by it without realizing that these guys are talking their book.
Okay, I got a lot of things to say in response to this. Okay, so first of all, it's weird to so if you really believe in something, let's say in this case, we don't really know what Michael Saylor's true feelings are about Bitcoin. We can't know for sure, right? He seems to be pretty enthusiastic about it. He's been talking about it essentially for 2 years straight. It's the way when you characterize him as losing his job, they at least spin it. MicroStrategy spins it as a promotion to executive chairman, not losing his job. So I don't know if that's entirely fair to say losing his job, but maybe it's a spin on their part too. I don't entirely know, quite frankly. But someone who's really passionate about certain assets, be it Bitcoin, be it certain stocks, would naturally buy those stocks, right? If you don't actually buy those stocks, I would say that's the person not to trust. Don't tell me what you think. Show me your portfolio, right? So that's what you actually believe, your portfolio, where you put your money where your mouth is. So he's someone who at least has put his money where his mouth is. I don't know if it's entirely fair to say, how dare he talk up Bitcoin when he's got literally billions of dollars in it? He has billions of dollars in it in theory because he believes in it. So then, of course, he would be an evangelist for Bitcoin. I admit it also helps him if he can drive the price up. But do you honestly think Michael Saylor's lone voice drives the price up? I certainly do not. I think buying billions of dollars drives the price up. I think he may convince certain other folks, but I don't think he's convincing tremendous amounts of people. And I don't know how this strategy, this very risky strategy that MicroStrategy has done, is really any different than when Goldman Sachs or any of the stuff in 2009, the big banks were doing shorting things or betting big against shorts or whatever they're doing, an incredibly poor risk management stuff and, making a lot of money until suddenly they weren't. These are all just strategies, right? These are just assets they're choosing as strategies. I don't know why you're singling out Bitcoin in this one case. Couldn't you say that about almost any stock and anyone pushing anything? And how is this different in your mind?
I could probably say it about Tesla, where there's an evangelical nature around the people who are investing in Tesla stock.
Yes,
and
I agree with that.
The type of, earnings per share as far as what people are paying for those shares is just spectacularly different than the rest of the market. And in order to rationalize that, you have to become an evangelist. And the only way that it works out for Tesla as well is if Tesla becomes the biggest car company in the world and an extraordinarily spectacular spaceship company, and everything to do with the stock works out incredibly well. And there's a difference too between, you're talking about him putting his money into it it's not really his money. He's putting the money of the company into it and the money of that he's borrowed from other people into it. He's incentivized, to just, he goes for the fences, and then he goes to a Bitcoin conference in Miami, and he tells all these people who are just like normal people, like you, like me, like other people who want to come and invest.
This is really unfair what you're saying. This is unfair. First of all, I will say, people who are at a Bitcoin conference are not normal people. They're strong Bitcoin enthusiasts already who are going and specifically are choosing to see him speak. They are not rando people on the street who turn on the network news and see him and talk about this. It's not a fair comparison, number one. Number two, he actually does own a tremendous amount of Bitcoin personally, has spent, I believe, hundreds of millions of dollars on Bitcoin personally as well. So he has spent his own money on it as well. You would be right, by the way, if he hadn't done that. That would be a fair point to say that it's just MicroStrategy. Although, since MicroStrategy is his company, he still is betting essentially a lot of his wealth on it, right? A lot of his future potential wealth on it. But no, he does own a tremendous amount also. To conflate regular old Robinhood retail with the people who are attending a Bitcoin conference, to me, is really unfair. And I don't see how you can reasonably sit there and do that.
Okay. Let me ask you a question. Okay. Has your mother bought some Bitcoin during this current sort of time period?
She has. I think she's bought $100 worth, but she has bought some Bitcoin.
Okay.
Other members of my family have as well, and more significant amounts.
My sister's bought some Bitcoin in this run too, whereas before she had no interest or awareness in it. And I haven't spoken to her about it. But in the zeitgeist out there, there's people like my sister, your mother. There's a lot of people like that, especially younger people who might even not have very much money, who have got the Robinhood app on their phone, who do follow Twitter or do see the advertisements on the Super Bowl, or do read, have in their Twitter feed, crypto enthusiasts like Michael Saylor. And so when he says something like, take all your money and buy Bitcoin, then take all your time, figure out how to borrow more money to buy more Bitcoin, then take all your time to figure out what you can sell to buy Bitcoin. There's nobody really, at Goldman Sachs who's saying that. There's no comparables to this type of.
This is an absurd argument. I have to push back very strongly. First of all, there are absolutely people at major money man at Guggenheim. The guy who runs Guggenheim comes out repeatedly and says things about Bitcoin, trying to move the market price of Bitcoin regularly. They're a traditional finance thing, but first he said Bitcoin was going to 10,000, and then they bought up a bunch of Bitcoin. Then he said Bitcoin's going to 60,000. He constantly changes it. There are lots of people doing this, but the thing that I don't understand, there's two sort of pieces to this theorem that I think are underlying it, which I don't agree with. So one of them is the assumption that, first of all, that the idea that buying Bitcoin is a bad thing. I don't necessarily think it is. I don't think it is. I think it's fine to do that. In fact, I think it's good to do that. That's just piece number one. So you're almost saying it like these are all victims that have been duped into doing this. I would say this is a good thing, but that's part one. Part two is the idea that somehow people who are exposed to other people's opinions then have no way of making any decisions for themselves. Twitter is full of people giving strong opinions on everything, including all manner of financial advice. And so, by the way, is Mad Money with Jim Cramer, who, by the way, is awful at his job and is constantly telling people to buy and sell things. And then 3 days later, when the market moves the other way, claims he didn't say that. There's clip after clip of that on YouTube if you want to see it. He's hurting people constantly, and he's got a much bigger voice than that. And he's not known as like the Bitcoin, ambassador the way Saylor is. He's just a financial guy who's got a TV show. Why is it that you think these people need to be protected from one voice? Now, of course, there are other people doing this too, but like a voice saying like, hey, I think you should buy Bitcoin. I think of course, there's going to be extreme folks on all sides. One of the things that Twitter does is it democratizes these voices, and you don't have to follow them if you don't want to. No one has to listen to this guy if they don't want to. They're not forced to it, right? They choose to listen to him. And you could say that's a mistake. That's fine. But those people are probably in trouble anyway if they're not willing to learn about it first, because that means they're going to keep making decisions like that about lots of things, financial and otherwise. They're probably not going to make good decisions based on that's very hard to you're going to need a hell of a run to everyone you listen to is got your best interest in mind or is going to be correct, even if they do. So I don't understand why you think they have to be protected from. I think Michael Saylor is both a bit Looney Tunes. He's a bit of a crazy dude. In terms of the way he talks about these things. I wish he wasn't one of the more popular people, quite frankly. But he's a very risk seeking type. And he's one of the louder voices right now. And I think eventually we're going to get more mature, better voices, but we're not there yet. And that's the deal. That's how it works with a sort of an emerging, growing asset, I think, like this anyway. What are you laughing at?
Okay. I like what you came to at the end there, where you were talking about eventually we're going to get some more mature voices. I agree with you that we don't know if Bitcoin is a terrific investment or a terrible investment and going to go to zero. There are a lot of things that you've shared with me, and also then subsequently from how I suppose my viewpoint has changed with what I'm reading based on what you've told me, where I think, yeah, you know what, this could really be a thing long term. And someone who gets into it now and is buying a Bitcoin at $20,000 really might have a great investment on their hand, and that eventually is a store of value.
Perhaps.
However,
yeah,
that is completely different. That this could be a good investment, and it's an investment I believe in. Saying that, and how you've talked about Bitcoin as well, where you've shared, your passionate belief in it, but also talked about that people have to buy what is like what fits for them in their life. And, you always said to me about what you're willing to lose as well. And that you're in you have a risk appetite that a lot of people don't have, but you're upfront about that. You're upfront about the risk appetite piece of that. And you've said on our podcast several times, and yes, there is the possibility of someone could hack a Bitcoin. I don't think it's going to happen. And I see all these reasons why it seems extraordinarily unlikely, but if it did happen, then the price is immediately going to go down to zero, and I'm going to lose the money that I have in that. And you're willing to take that risk. And there's some other possible, risks as well, as far as alternative cryptos or government intervention. But you look at those risks as best you can, and you acknowledge them. You're not telling people to buy all of the Bitcoin that they can, with every dollar they have, to sell their stuff and to borrow money to do so. Right. And so one, like that, those are two very different ways of talking about crypto or talking about Bitcoin. And secondly, I don't see the people who are hearing this as victims. But I don't paint it either as black and white as you do. Like, there's a reason why people are spending, companies are spending millions of dollars on Super Bowl ads, whether that is Taco Bell or whether that is Coinbase. There's a reason why they are hiring, celebrities and actors, or were in the heydays, to promote their products, because people are influenced by advertising. People are influenced by what the culture is telling them, especially when they put themselves in a little bit of a bubble. So I'm not saying people don't have a responsibility around that, but I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with calling out like what you think is really extreme or outrageous behavior when you hear, like, let's say a quote like that. And what turned me on to him initially was I was listening to a podcast by somebody who I listen to regularly. I can't remember which one it was. It might have been Lex Friedman, and he was on there, and I was hearing him talk about Bitcoin, and I was like, wow, this guy's like true believer, and he's making some very interesting points. But then I listened to it in more detail, and there were some aspects of it where I was like, he's kind of really stretching what he's making a real leap of an assumptive leap in different points in the conversation, so that's sort of what tagged him in my mind. And then I saw this was an article in the Wall Street Journal a couple of days ago about him being fired, just tossed out of the company into the position of executive chairman.
Right. Again, it's hard to know exactly what happened there. And I don't know if the board actually essentially fired him, or if he says he wanted to quit that job to like focus exclusively on Bitcoin. And seeing that's all he's done for the last 2 years, I kind of believe it, but I don't know what happened, and wouldn't claim to know.
Right.
I guess I feel, I hear what you're saying. I agree that some of the things he says are reckless, and I hope people don't follow that advice, but I don't believe many people are following that advice. Do you know people who are selling everything they have and taking out a second mortgage against their home and buying Bitcoin with it? I'm not saying there are zero people in the world doing that, but I'm saying we could probably count the number of families doing that on one hand or two hands. Like, this is not a thing that's happening with any regularity in any way. If it was, the price of Bitcoin would be way higher than it is, quite frankly. Like, where's all retail buying? Retail isn't buying that much, if anything. Bitcoin hasn't been hot for a long time anyway. In all of this year, like, Bitcoin's price has been slowly like declining. It finally seems to have found a floor around $22,000. We'll see if that holds. But I don't think there's a lot of excitement around this. And I don't think Michael Saylor is someone who's the general public has a lot of exposure to. So I still don't, I hear what you're saying, and I don't disagree that I wish he said it differently, but you're going to get a wide spectrum of people talking about these things with different levels of hyperbole. Not just this, every financial instrument and everything that could be bought or sold is going to be spoken about that way. That's just how it is. So I don't know why this is really any different than anything else in your mind. I don't get it.
One, I think that maybe as far as the discussion that we're having, you're focusing, from my point of view, too much on Michael Saylor. So it's not about this one Michael Saylor quote and what he's saying and what he's done. It's more that this hyperbolic enthusiasm around around investing in Bitcoin, which tends to come from the Bitcoin bros. Like, I feel like there's a lot of that is not helpful for the average person. And so I want to create an opportunity to have a different voice, where somebody who obviously, what I think about it, which is that I think it's crazy for people to consider like some of these people seriously. But you are a crypto fat cat, and you've been in the game for some time now. And so I see this more as an opportunity for you, for someone who is a crypto enthusiast, to say to somebody who is, let's say, new to the game, because we're in one cycle. Someone might see this pod in 2 years' time, or in 4 years' time, there's another halving where things are shooting up again. And there's just this whole momentum in the culture around, oh my God, Bitcoin, and I don't want to miss out. From your point of view, what would you say to somebody as far as how do they look at people who are crypto enthusiasts who are saying stuff online, and whether they're talking about Bitcoin or some other alternative coin that's new and that's going to make 10x, and how do you read those type of things with a critical eye, and what type of investment decisions would you suggest? Obviously, this isn't professional advice; it's just educational entertainment. But what would you suggest to somebody who was, let's say, like my sister or like your mother, starting to think, hey, I want to get into this crypto thing because it's so exciting and there's so much happening around it?
When people ask me for advice about, like, what should I buy first? That's something people ask a lot. And I want to reiterate, this is not financial advice, but here's the kind of things I say to certain people at times. Okay. I feel really strongly, and this is actually something I've said to you as well, that like there's two cryptocurrencies that I think have a great chance to be around for a long time. And everything else is, we'll see. Long time meaning 2030, they're thriving. That's my window of a long time, just so we're clear. I feel like Bitcoin and Ethereum both, I'd be very surprised if they're not here and thriving in 2030. Bitcoin's way safer than Ethereum of the two, because Bitcoin is atop their perch and no one's really coming for them as the store of value gold 2.0 narrative. Ethereum's narrative is really different. It's smart contracts, or something we've talked about recently, and sort of commerce, like the financial base layer of the internet. And there's a lot of competition for that, but Ethereum is way, way, way ahead. So to me, those are the two things that are they're the two biggest cryptocurrencies. They're the two safest cryptocurrencies. They still have a lot of upside. They don't have the kind of upside that some of the smaller ones do, for sure. So part of it is also about what your financial goals are. But I always encourage people, if they're interested in buying crypto, to start at the top, basically, and buy the safe things. Start there. It's really hard to go wrong. Like, if someone were to buy Bitcoin, in my mind, while nothing's a guarantee, and of course it could go to zero, and there are things that can happen to have it go to zero, I think it's a good investment even if it goes to zero. What I mean by that is, yeah, that's right. See, when you're saying good investment or it could go to zero, I disagree. I think a good investment can go to zero. A good investment would be the odds of it going to 5x or 10x versus the odds of it going to zero. So that way my expected value is high when I make the investment. That's, to me, is a good investment. A lot of them aren't going to work out. A lot of them are, but that's true for all investments in my mind. I'm trying to figure out what's the expected value here, and what's also the sort of the best risk-adjusted return. Ultimately, I think Bitcoin is, personally, I think it's the best risk-adjusted return in the world right now, because I think it is very, very safe ultimately, and I think it's got a great chance to grow much, much higher as we go. I think it's going to be a bumpy road. for sure, for lots of reasons, and we can get into all that. But so I encourage people also, though, like you're saying, if they were gonna spend money on it, not to put in a huge amount of money, not to ape into it like crazy or anything like that, but to get off zero. That to me is important. Like, own something, have a stake in the game, so you can start to understand it, start to learn about what these things are, how they work, and then you can start to decide, does this actually make sense? Is this something that I could see sort of the world needing or wanting in the future? I feel very clear that both Ethereum and Bitcoin are things the world is going to need and want. And I admit I still can be wrong about this, but I made a pretty heavy bet that I'm right. And so far I've been right, but we have a long way to go.
So what's the time frame that you would encourage someone to think about if they were sort of going to do that, where they were going to get sort of some experience in it, learn a little more about it, and then from an investment point of view, although this is an investment advice, would you be thinking, 3 months, 6 months, 5 years? Where are you at?
I think someone shouldn't even, if someone's going to buy this stuff, and anyone who's listening to this or isn't a professional trader should be thinking only in long term, only over the long haul. I think not looking for short term gains, in my opinion. Really hard to do that well. And in fact, mostly retail gets destroyed trying to like capture the wave going up and sell at the right time and buy at the right time. They almost always do that poorly. It's just not, you have to really be incredible. Very, very few people are good at that. But you don't have to be good at that to do well in this market, in my opinion. All you have to do is buy and hold, wait. And so I think 5 years is a good timeline for that. And so what I encourage people, because what I've learned is people don't do well with the volatility of it. People get very emotional, get confused. No matter what I say to someone when they're about to buy it, I get a lot of phone calls throughout the next 12 to 24 months as the price goes all over the place with their concern or excitement or whatever. And so for most people, I think it's probably better to buy it and not look at the price. Like, try and forget about it for 4 or 5 years. And then you're very likely to have a very happy moment 5 years from now, where it's like, oh my God, it's worth that much, kind of a thing. Bitcoin's always been worth more than whatever price it was 4 years before at any point of its life. It's been alive now for 13 years, but that's always been true for it. I don't expect that to not continue. I think that will continue. Almost certainly. So go ahead.
But it's like, I hear you, and all of what you just said made sense. But at some point that can't continue, right? Like, so those type of exponential returns at some point, there's the point where, oh yeah, that happened up until now, but it no longer is 4x over however many
100%. You're totally right. I believe we're still in price discovery for these assets, though. These assets are not being used the way they're going to be used, in my opinion. Like, they're not, most people don't really understand them yet. Most people, they aren't fully integrated into the infrastructure and into people's lives yet, for the most part. Like, people like me, sure, I interact with these things every day, but someone like you and most of the world do not, right? Most people couldn't explain to me what Ethereum was in any way. They might think it was like a, like an element or something like that, not a cryptocurrency even. But like, I believe as the world starts to build on top of these systems, we're still in price discovery. And at some point, yes, there will not be a continued upward, huge upside moment for these things. Like, we'll have reached their fair market value for real when the world is really using them. But I think that's like 2030, not even 5 years from now, not 2027 even. Maybe it's 2035. I think that's a ways away, but that's why I think there's such an incredible opportunity to buy these assets, because we are nowhere close, in my mind, to what these things are going to be valued at, if they're valued, if they end up being used the way I believe they're going to be used. If not, they're going to go to zero. But if they go to zero 30% of the time, or let's say I'm wrong, they go to zero 60% of the time, but the other 40% of the time, they 10x or 100x or something like that. And while that may sound crazy, I think Bitcoin 10xing from its current place is very reasonable down the road, if not a 20x. I think Ethereum, which is currently at about $2,300, 30xing, still having at least a 30x in it down the road, way down the road, completely reasonable for it. So that means 40% of the time, if you can hit some of those numbers, and not that you would always hit those numbers the entire 40% of the time, but you hit a 10x some percentage of that time, you hit a 30x some percentage of that time, you hit a 5x some percentage of that time, I believe your expected value is going to be incredible, even if you go to zero 60% of the time. And in my mind, and people like me think you go to zero very, very little instead of something as high as 60. Ross Stevens, who's the head of the New York digital investment and NIDIG, the digital investment group, that's what it's called. And they invest for private investors and for companies, billions. So they do huge Bitcoin deals. He says that when the big institutions ask him, like, what are the chances of Bitcoin going to zero? He said in 2017, when it was still a speculative asset, he said, oh, pretty good chance is what he used to say. But now he says his answer is, what are the chances of Christianity going to zero? Now, that may be a little strong, but the idea is like, he thinks it's too late. Like, it's already indoctrinated itself into like too many places. Too many very rich people own it. Too many very rich people care about it. Countries are starting to adopt it in different ways. Like, the genie's out of the bottle. You could disagree with that. You're welcome to. And it's possible he's just wrong about that. So he basically thinks it's like there's a 0% chance it's going to go to zero at this point. I don't know if that's true or not, but I think it's a very low percent.
All right. So let's just summarize some of what you said there. So if it was somebody who is new to crypto or Bitcoin, it would be getting in with sort of having a 5-year window where you think, okay, I'm putting this money in and I'm going to leave it here for at least 5 years and let this kind of ride. So if I needed money, if there's something I'm going to need money for in 6 months, a new car or my kid's education or down payment for a place to move into, then it's probably a bad idea to throw it into an extremely volatile asset.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, I like what you said about, the expected value piece. And if you're investing in a really risky investment, that even if that one investment that could 10x goes to zero, it's still a worthwhile investment if you've got, like you said, that 60% or 40% chance or whatever of having a series of investments where you're diversifying like you would with a stock, where you've got 5 or 10 of those stocks and you're believing that they might all 10x, and there's a decent chance of that for some of them. And so that even if only a couple of them do that, you can still be well ahead of the game. I would say with that, I'm guessing that your other alternative investments would also be crypto. Like, let's say, for example, with stocks, you diversify, you might buy a Microsoft, a Google, a Coca-Cola, Netflix, and you've sort of diversifying that way. When you're saying, okay, so with Bitcoin, I think it's going to 10x reasonably within 5 years. You're saying that, but then if it doesn't and it went to zero, it's still a good investment because I think the chances of that are actually quite good. And if it doesn't, there's other alternative investments that I have that are similarly quite good. So some of them are going to go. And that's what you've experienced over the last, let's say 5 years with this. So is that what you're talking about? Other crypto investments or no?
I don't think that's the only other kind of investment people should be doing. I don't think almost anyone should be solely crypto as an investment, to be really clear. I think that's a bad strategy. As someone who has very, very deep, and my portfolio is mostly crypto, I am very risk seeking and I'm willing to ride it out. But I think most people don't have the temperament to do that. And most people, it's not going to be a fun ride for most people, and there's just no need to do that anyway. So like, I started by having a reasonable stock portfolio and started like making small investments in Bitcoin in 2014. And then that really worked out, as you can imagine, if you look at the prices from Bitcoin then till now. And that has enabled me to then work from that original, $5,000 investment into lots of other things, and I've been able to build a portfolio. So I do have a bunch of like home run type cryptos that I'm hoping to hit. I think most of them are going to go to zero. But I've had one that's done extremely, extremely well. And that alone has sort of carried all the other ones, and it makes it fine. And then I also have my very solid cryptos like your Bitcoins and Ethereums mostly, and a few others too, that I see more as like blue chip type stuff. But then, of course, I still have my stock portfolio. I'm not like getting rid of my stock portfolio because I'm aware I could wake up someday and all of crypto could be null and void. I do acknowledge that possibility, and I want to not be, a pauper if that were to happen. So I'm also trying to take, some money off the table here and there as we go. I'm looking for opportunities to at times sell some of the crypto, just to, take profits as I go, not trying to get out of crypto by any means, not even close, but not also to feel like I have to ride it all the way to the absolute peak before I turn anything into dollars again, which is an easy mindset to get caught up in.
Okay. And so this might be a little challenging, but I just want to ask you, if you were to reshape Michael Saylor's quote from your point of view as a Bitcoin enthusiast, as the Crypto Fatcat. So if you were to reshape his quote that was take all your money and buy Bitcoin, then take your time, then borrow more, then take your time to figure out how you can sell things to buy Bitcoin and never sell it. And then basically just, buy and hold forever. What would be your quote to counter that?
I would say take a few hours first and really learn about Bitcoin. Really try and understand what it is, what it brings to the world, what makes it special. If you feel you understand it and see the value of it, which I believe if someone did a good deep dive on it, they would see the value. But I feel like that's happened even with you as we've done this and talked about crypto. Your take on Bitcoin has changed pretty significantly, I think. Maybe not all the way over on this side of the equation, but you're not as skeptical as you used to be. I would argue you don't seem to be, at least. So I would start there, and then I would say, as I was saying before, buy some amount of Bitcoin, and with the intention of holding it for the long term. And the long term is at least 5 years, perhaps 10 years. That would be the first things I would say. I could say a lot more. I could talk about probably it's a good idea to dollar cost average and buy a little every month, so you don't have to worry about the volatility of the price. And then you could pick an amount that you could buy that, doesn't hurt you financially and you're willing to lose. But some people don't want to do that. Some people want to just buy it and have a bunch and whatever bunch is to them and hold it. And that's fine too. And that's mostly the way I've done it. Although the last few years I've dollar cost averaged in. But what I think is important is understanding it, owning some amount that is enough that were it to hit real numbers. Like if you think to yourself, if Bitcoin were to hit $250,000 per Bitcoin, is the amount that I would own enough that I would feel like I had really done something, like I had a big success? I would be looking personally to that as like a metric to like how much should I own. This, of course, assuming you can afford to do that, but your financial situation ought to inform that number anyway, right? Like what feels like a big success to some people. Making $10,000 would be a huge win. To other people, that would be nothing, right? And so it all depends on your own personal financial situation. But that you yourself would consider it to be a really big win. And that could, again, mean whatever that means to you. I also would encourage most people to buy some Bitcoin with the intention of maybe not never selling it, but holding it for the extreme long haul instead of the 5 or 10 year window, but maybe even much longer than that, maybe to pass down to your family or to hold for 20 to 30 years, because some of the scenarios for Bitcoin, if things were to go perfectly, and they are unlikely to, admittedly, but if they were to go perfectly, where the Bitcoin becomes the world's global reserve currency, which I don't think is going to happen, to be clear, but makes a lot of sense for it to happen. Like it would be the best global reserve currency. I don't believe the countries will ever agree to that, but there are scenarios where that would happen. And if that were the case, the price of Bitcoin is much, much higher than $250,000 per. It's much more like 1.5 million per or 2 million per. Again, I think this is very unlikely, and I think it's a long, long, long way off. But like we're talking about hitting home runs, that's like grand slam, like a 10-run grand slam, if something like that, or could even come close to that, right? If it has that impact in the world. And I think it's possible that it could. So I would encourage people to buy some with a long haul thought process, like 5 or 10 years, and then an even longer haul thought process for at least some. Like I wouldn't encourage someone to sell all their Bitcoin in 5 years. Now, of course, they may have a financial situation where they want to do that. They just want to get out. Of course they should. But I think if they like it at all, holding on to at least some for a while, like a long while, is probably a good idea. So I still am, of course, a deep believer in this stuff. But guess what? I also own Bitcoin, and I am, as we say in the crypto world, shilling my bags. I'm talking my book, right? But I'm not doing it so people will buy Bitcoin and drive the price up. I don't think we're going to have any kind of audience that's going to drive the price of Bitcoin up in any significant way that's going to affect me. It's because I really believe this. But everyone has to decide this for themselves. What I don't like, and what I think can happen with the Michael Saylors, but much worse, really, the Jim Cramers of the world, is people see someone saying something about Bitcoin, another crypto, a stock, whatever it may be, and they don't do any research on it themselves. They say, if that guy says it, it's good enough for me. That guy, and they go and they buy it. And I think people get in a lot of trouble with that all the time, because there's a lot of agendas out there. I know crypto influencers certainly get paid by coins sometimes. Like cryptocurrencies will pay crypto influencers to shill their coins on their videos, and that'll drive the price up. And then the cryptocurrency, the people who own a bunch of it will sell it, will dump it all on retail, and so will the crypto influencer. And that happens for sure. I think that happens with other things as well, like stocks and all sorts of stuff, maybe a little less clear with stocks, but I think versions of that happen with all these things. But I think ultimately it's a buyer beware market for everything. It's too bad that it has to be that way, but it is. It's caveat emptor, my man.
Okay. Well, thank you for offering that alternative quote, alternative perspective to Michael Saylor. And that was, really fascinating. That is all we have time for this episode of the Crypto Fatcat and the Crypto Skeptic. I'm Sean Fitzgerald, and that is Jonathan Levy. See you next time.